Hey, good afternoon and good morning to everyone that's joined us from abroad. Shall I say Happy New Year? I don't feel like it is New Year because the last 2 weeks have been crazy, but we are still in the sort of middle of January. So Happy New Year, Rick.
Happy New Year. It's been so long. I haven't spoke to you since last year.
I know. It's been a crazy few weeks. I just can't believe we're in 2024 already.
Time flies.
So we have our first session of 2024, Global Payroll Challenges and How to Overcome Them. So there are a lot of challenges to do with global payroll. I was just I had a meeting earlier and just saying how much the global payroll industry has changed in the last 10 years. So can you give a sort of a current overview of the challenges we'll find at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a step back a little bit before as well because I think when we talk about global payroll, I think we need to look at the journey that we've taken over the last 10 years. I remember when I was head of HR for a government contractor, global payroll for us was Excel files and emailing them over, and then getting payroll files in different types of formats. And so from there to actually getting to technology. That's been a huge leap in what they call the future of work, but also something that's streamlined across the globe that we've been able to see. But we're still having challenges, Melanie. We're still seeing the biggest challenge actually is compliance, making sure you're really understanding the rules, the regulations, what it means to do business in that particular country and to pay employees correctly in that particular country. Another one is timelines on making sure payments are funded on time. There's still challenges behind that because some of it's bank holidays in those particular locations. Some of that is also payment rails and how things are being funded. New countries are countries are starting to create new rules and regulations regarding local funding versus foreign funding. They're also creating salary bank accounts in some countries to double check where how much people are actually getting paid so they can double check for tax payments as well. So things are ever evolving on the global payroll side. But so compliance tends to be the biggest. Most organizations tend to find in their first year they're either fined or are given a penalty somehow for not being fully compliant in that particular country. And that really doesn't really mean by the payroll provider that's in the country. Sometimes it's just they don't understand what needs to be done before they set up that actual payroll. I had a client recently who came to me and said, hey, we hired someone in Austria. We didn't realize that we had to do these other three registrations to pay the employee compliantly. We've been paying them. We thought we were doing payroll deductions. But because of the type of business we were still subject to certain regulations. And because of that, they were fined. And again, is that compliance piece? They didn't know every single thing and how they do business in that particular country.
Yeah, because when we run surveys, actually every year we run a survey and we always ask what the biggest challenges are. And it's never a surprise because the highest challenge for anybody in the payroll industry is compliance. And I think some of the interesting comments we get from some of the payroll community is that they expect or assume the payroll provider to update them on compliance changes within country. And then they're surprised when they receive a fine. For example, France. France is a hard country to process payrolls in, isn't it?
Is it?
Um, yeah, one of the hardest ones, I would say. And we've heard it a number of times actually, particularly in France, where all of a sudden they'll receive a fine because they're not compliant, but they have outsourced the payroll process.
Yeah, I think that when you think about business registration, I think that, let's take a step back and see what those steps are in actually setting up a payroll in a particular country. When you're working with a payroll provider, most of the time they're not going to have a registered office that you can leverage if you don't actually have an office in that particular country. So those notices that come in France, for example, they go to whatever your registered office is, and sometimes they have to be mailed to you, they have to be scanned to you, and sometimes they're just companies that are just you know paper pushing, so they don't really understand the importance of the notices that they're getting. So by time that notice comes in and then you receive it, and then you have to provide that to your local payroll provider, there's time that's elapsed from that perspective, and it's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is to make sure they are processing payroll based on the information that you're providing to them. Now, they're going to keep you in compliance within the day-to-day regulations, but when it comes to fines or registrations or industry information, you are the legal employer from that perspective. So you're the one that's providing that, and you're the one doing the registrations. Now, there are some providers out there that will guide you through that process, but you're still going to have that gap in regards to how notices are provided to you from the local governments as well. And sometimes when we get those local notices, if we don't speak the local language, we don't really understand the gravitas behind it. And so making sure you have a great partner that will kind of walk you through that and guide you through some of those pitfalls. Those who've not only just been the provider, but maybe have been the actual user or gone through this process themselves can help you through that particular process. But a lot of it's just is how we establish ourselves in particular countries, how notices are that come to us from the government, and then actually how do we deliver that information to our local providers. That gap is what creates a lot of compliance from that. Now, the complexities of payroll is also tied to that. When you provide information to a local provider or you're trying to process payroll yourself through a third-party system, um, the understanding of what you guys do and how you do it is only based on the information that you provide. So an employee's registration, we'll use like a CBA, a collective bargaining agreement, can be interpreted multiple ways depending on what you're actually doing in that particular country. So if you're in a country that has 20 different CBAs and you're trying to identify how you're going to classify your employees, if you don't have the right partner to help you with that, that can create a nuisance for you as well. So it's not just processing payroll, but it's also the HR piece of it as well that actually impacts your overall global compliance for payroll.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned last year, seems like such a long time ago now, was always review. And that's something else I also heard another global payroll manager say, that they're constantly reviewing. So you have your provider, but you should always constantly renew. Just don't think you've signed up for the year, that's it. Always be aware of changes, or just keep your eyes on the ball, basically.
Yeah, I think you have to understand that global compliance is so important, and rules change on a daily basis sometimes. And so, understand not just depending on one person, have that. I call it the trifecta. Have your own review. There are a lot of organizations like Bloomberg or LexisNexis that can help provide that information to you or updates that are going on in countries. Obviously, your local payroll provider should be able to support that as well. Some of them actually have really good technology that have integrated notices or updates within some of those technologies that, hey, there's a change, you're aware of that proactively. And then also making sure that you have a really good relationship with your tax accountants or your local counsel in country as well. That will, you don't have to reach out to them on a day-to-day basis, but they're a good checkbox for that validation for anything that may be coming up or informing you proactively a part of that trifecta to keep you fully compliant in that particular country. It's really important. And then also when you understand the translation of language, the interpretation, having that trifecta there really does allow you to validate the information and make sure everyone's on the same page versus just one person's interpretation. Because sometimes a person can be incorrect. As successful and well knowledge they are, interpretations, especially when you're translating languages, is an interpretation. So it's really important to get that three-pronged approach when you're validating that information.
I should have said earlier, but we jumped straight into it, that we do try and answer any questions that you guys have. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask Rick, because Rick is very honest, I will say, and he's not scared of any questions. So make sure you use Rick's time, during this LinkedIn Live. Have you come across any sort of practical or any case studies of where maybe companies have had some awkward situations around compliance but had turned it around? Is there anything that sticks to you that you think, oh my god, but they managed to turn it around?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's confusion in what they read online. You can't Google everything, and everything on the internet's not correct. So I had a situation. I'll give a couple examples actually, which I thought was quite interesting. The notion of employees can be hired in one country in Europe, and you can hire all your employees in one country in Europe, regardless of where they are, and you'll be fully compliant with European payroll. Well, yes and no when it comes to that. Can any European employee work in any European Union country? Absolutely. That's what the European Union allows. It's part of their rights. It's part of being part of the European Union. But can they actually work in Ireland and actually live in Spain, and actually truly be headquartered living in Spain? The answer is really no. They really have to be processing payroll in those local countries, because if the employees, and there's benefits that the employees are entitled to, that's unemployment, maybe it's maternity leave or paternity leave. Those are the benefits those employees are entitled to. So I had a client who came to us. They had hired about 50 employees, and they hired them all through, I believe it was, I would say the Netherlands. But the employees were over about 20 different countries in Europe. And there was a situation that came up where an employee wanted to go on maternity leave, and she filed locally for benefits. The government came back and said, "We have no record of you working in this country." And she's like, "What are you talking about? I'm paying taxes. I'm paying benefits." And she realized that she was actually being paid in a different country from that perspective. And so that was really non-compliant. But when we spoke to that particular client, they said, "Well, that's what we saw on the internet. We saw that all European employees can work in one country. We can pay them out of one country." And that was a situation where it was a misinterpretation of what the law really was from that perspective. We've had other situations where the definition of contractor, how someone hires contractors. People think, "Oh, I can hire everyone as a contractor. I'll be fully compliant." From that perspective, we don't have entities, or we have entities, but we prefer contractors, or employees prefer to be a contractor because they actually net more money at the end of the day. And then they realized that that didn't really work. I'll give you the example of Honduras. I use that one because that comes up quite often when I think about this. We had a client who had a number of employees in Honduras, and you can only be a contractor for 60 days in Honduras before it's deemed that you have to be an employee for consecutive work. They found out that they were the contractors for 9 months. And so what ended up happening there was, when they realized they were non-compliant, the government ended up finding the employer both the employee and the employer portion of taxes, because they did not want to impact the employee's life. So they said, "Look, it was the decision of the employer to make this happen," and so the employer was responsible from that perspective. Now, they were told by a provider actually that they can be a contractor. This is a contractor pay provider, and they realized they were non-compliant. Now, when they went back to that particular contractor, they looked at their SLAs and it says, "We give you advice, but you are the one who chooses the decision. And because you made the decision, you're responsible for those penalties, even off advice." So that trifecta, again, I get back to, is why you should always have multiple validations of advice. But that compliance piece of that, what you find online, what you may hear, it's just really important to validate that information continuously.
It's very challenging. I just want to say it's great to see where everyone's from today. You have Spain, India, the States. I know it's a bit cold for you guys, a little bit colder than normal for you guys over in the States. And we have Louise, who thankfully has nothing in France. So it'd be good to know where you guys are processing payrolls from. One question I have is, and it seems to happen quite a lot, and I wondered, Rick, your thoughts on how people should manage this, and tell me if this has happened to you, who's watching today. If you have been told by your directors or senior management that they have recruited a person in a country that do not have an entity, you do not have a payroll set up, and they are starting work next week. And I'm starting to hear this more and more. And unfortunately, sometimes the payroll department is the last people to find out. And actually, you're the most important people to make sure that people get paid. So firstly, has this happened to you who are listening today? And Rick, have you heard of this? I'm sure you have. And what would you suggest?
Have I heard of it? Yes. Has it happened to me? Absolutely. So a long time ago, I used to run HR and also run payroll and government contracting. And I remember the CEO walking into my office one day and saying, "Hey, we just hired someone in Japan. Can you get them paid?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah." So I went online. I think at the time we were using Paychecks for our payroll. This is before we were getting really into the domestic side, the global side of the world. And I called Paychecks and I said, "I can't find the drop down for Japan." And they said, "We don't do global payroll." And so it was daunting. I had to figure out how to, one, make sure that employee can get hired because my CEO at the time told me that we had to get them hired. But then two, I had to make sure that we did it compliantly. And so actually, that's actually what spun my entire career because I had to go find the solution that was like that. And if those who have followed these LinkedIn lives, I've talked about my journey and actually leaving HR and actually establishing my own companies to really support this problem. This comes up quite often. The one thing that I think it's important is when payroll, we talk about HR and payroll needing to be at the table in the conversations. I think there's an education piece that we have to do as HR and payroll professionals. We have to make sure that leadership understands that just can't hire people where we don't have entities, or if we do want to hire that, we need to look at other solutions and be ready to give them examples of those solutions, like the employer of record model. Or if we want to hire someone as a contractor, for example, we can do that, but we have to understand the stipulations behind that and what risk that we're taking as a business and what we're willing to take on. And if it's compliant or not. Not every country has the same rules regarding employee versus contractor, but you really have to look at that. So we keep getting back to complexity of global payroll compliance. That is the big one. It's never a black and white situation. It's a lot of gray. And I think the interpretation piece behind that is really understanding, but communication is going to be so important from a payroll perspective and an HR perspective. Lock and key, and when you're sitting at the table with the leadership team, understanding how you can navigate that because we all, at the end of the day, payroll, benefits, HR, that's the most sensitive parts of the business. That's people's livelihoods. And so what we have to do is we have to focus on the conversation and saying, this is not just the rules and regulations, this is the employee experience that we're actually impacting here. And with that employee experience, we've got to make sure that we're doing it compliantly so that they don't have to focus on if they're going to get paid on time. They want to make sure they're paid correctly. They don't want any tax notices. They don't want to make sure they're not compliant. We've got to make sure we do it the right way. And that's what we have to do as payroll individuals, speaking with leadership, that this is what we do. We're supporting the overall employee experience.
And it is, we've spoken about this a number of times, haven't we? It is so important for payroll and HR to have a seat at the table. So I think it's coming down to networking and getting to know your partners within the organisation for them to actually understand what you guys do, what the role is within the business, and how important your function is.
Yeah, and Melanie, I'm obviously, I've got a new solution coming out, but I've sat down with a number of our prospects and our clients and some of even our internal employees, and I actually walked through what it meant to process payroll. And I remember sitting in the room and about an hour after kind of walking through it with them, I saw a lot of wide eyes, like a lot of open mouths, and it complex. People don't realize the complexity that comes in actually processing payroll, and the challenges that it comes. It's not just pressing a couple buttons and there's a paycheck, and then you can process a payment to an employee. There are rules and regulations that companies must follow, and those rules and regulations can get very granular depending on your industry that you work in or what you're actually how you're operating in that particular country. And so, making sure you have the right partner, the right information, the right validation, and the right plan and what you're looking to execute is going to be really important when you're managing your global payroll initiatives.
Yeah, because it's, even last night, my phone was going a bit crazy because there was a new legislation or something changed in the UK, and there's changes every single day in every country, and it's hard to keep on top of all of it, isn't it? So have you seen any future trends in global payroll management?
Yeah, so we've talked about AI. I mean, that's kind of the new word everyone's talking about these days. But AI, I think I've seen some really cool trends and even some things that I'm working on as well. How you can learn how are people actually processing payroll, how people are actually reviewing payroll, what type of information they're looking for, what employees are looking for in the payroll. We've seen more and more trends that employees, it's not just about the net payroll anymore. Employees want to understand because they're working multiple jobs now, especially post COVID. There's been a lot of entrepreneurs that have been made, or what they call the side gigs that employees are like to do. So they're now looking at how much am I paying in taxes? What do I need to be credited for? So employees and employers are really diving deeper into just not just processing payroll, really understanding the true cost behind that. And so AI is allowing us to kind of see kind of those trends behind that, and then create a better experience both for the employee and the employer to get the information they're looking for readily at their fingertips. Another thing we're seeing is that how employers are looking to consolidate their payrolls. Historically, people were very comfortable working with local providers in different countries because they felt like they got a local perspective. But when you're working in 50 countries with 50 different providers, that can be very challenging, and that's a lot of overhead that you need to add to the organization to support that. And so what we're seeing from a trend is that consolidation piece. Employers are starting to look for a local one provider that can actually provide that overall support for them, and be able to make sure they can manage that in one central location. Now, there's a challenge that comes with that is one provider does come with, what type of knowledge that they support from a local perspective. So you've got to look at the foundational piece behind that. But that's a big trend that we're finding. Another one that we're finding is that different type of pay. We're getting questions about, how can I pay in different currencies? Can I pay in different ways? Can I pay with Bitcoin? I think that came up a few times in some of the research that we've seen. So understanding the complexities behind that. A lot of countries, by the way, are saying no to Bitcoin because they're not going to devalue their own currencies. You'll never see that probably get passed through any governments because they don't want to devalue their own currencies. But employees want to know. They want to say, "Hey, I've got different ways that I want to manage my assets. How do I get this in?" And then also even split payments are coming up even more. It's a big trend in the U.S. It's been there for many years where you'll maybe put most of your paycheck in your checking account and then some in your savings. But you're seeing that to actually happen more on the international side, in it where employees are saying, "Hey, I actually want to start saving money. Hey, I may want to put some money into a money market. How do I split my direct deposit?" Which in global payroll wasn't a big trend in the past, and you're starting to see more and more of that as well. And then the last thing that we're seeing is just the analytics behind it. Employees want to know what's the flexibility, how often, how fast can I get paid? Can I get my net pay? Can I get instant pay? Can I get paid weekly now versus monthly? What are some of the things I can get my compensation a lot earlier? And so employers are trying to figure out to be competitive in that marketplace, how to be flexible in those work environments to be able to provide that flexibility and pay frequency.
Do you think earned wage access is going to be the norm, or the conversation around earned wage access is going to change the way that we pay our employees generally?
I think that we have to understand the generation that's coming into the workforce, and it's very different than my generation, the generation before me. I like to call them the popcorn generation. They want things that fast, and I think it's important that as employers we start to listen to that because if we're going to be competitive, if we want that type of talent to resonate with us and to work for us, we're going to want them to we're going to want to hear their needs and then their expectations as well. That doesn't mean that we're going to be able to do everything, but there's going to be some trends. You're starting to see that now with remote work. It's not just a COVID thing anymore. A lot of employees are leaving employers because of remote work. So we have to hear what employees are talking about and then start to make sure we factor that into our requirements. But yes, to answer your question, I think you're going to start to see a trend that direction.
So sorry, I'm going to go back to AI. So there's a lot of press in the UK about what jobs are going to go because of AI. The doomsday of these jobs are not going to be around. Do you think there's going to be a change in the function of the payroll and HR role because of AI?
Yeah, I think, look, we evolve as businesses. If you think about what we did 10 years ago, what we did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there are jobs that were there then that are not there now. That will evolve. I mean, we are evolving culture. We will see that technology is the direction we are going, and automation is key from that perspective. I'm going to tie that to a question I just saw in the chat about expat payroll as well. right now, one of the biggest challenges with shadow payroll is having to do pay wages in a particular country, and then also make sure that you're able to balance that out for your home country as well, and making sure that you're not overpaying in taxes from that perspective. AI is huge with that. I mean, 10 years ago, it was very manual. And to be honest, a lot of companies are still doing it manually because they're having to run semi payrolls from that perspective to validate that. So AI is one of the things that can get rid of that manual process, and allow us to create, methodologies and functionalities within platforms to allow us to simplify that overall complexity. But I'm going to answer that question directly. Expat payroll is probably one of the most complex, and because it's based on the home country and the home country rules. So I'll use the example of Spain, and I'll use the example of the U.S. Both countries are tax anywhere countries. There are tax uh, restrictions that you will have, not restrictions, excuse me, tax credits that you will get being an expat being the U.S., but you still have to pay taxes in a particular country like Spain. So you have to report your income. And so there are ways that a lot of employers try to report just basic income in that particular country and then report the rest of the income in the home country. But in actuality, if you look at the rules, you technically just report it both times, and then one you'll get credit in one or the other. So there's a lot of complexity because it's based on both the rules and regulations of both countries, and you've got to balance that out. There are some countries that allow you just to report income for visa processing. So they'll say your minimum wage that you have to have in a particular country is X. So we'll allow you to do that for a visa, and then you can report your income anywhere else. But those are treaties that they have with those particular countries. So when you're running shadow payrolls, it's just really important to understand both the rules and regulations of both countries, and then look at what's both advantageous for you as an employer and you as and the employee's overall experience.
One of the key questions I think we have almost on a daily basis is about RSUs. And one of the key things that we have to say from the GPA perspective is you need to get expert advice from a tax specialist.
Yeah, RFQs are very complicated as well because depending on the plan that you have, if you have a U.S. plan, you're granting income basically out of the U.S., or if you're a U.K. plan, you're granting out of the U.K. to foreign employees or to foreign contractors in some cases. And so there are some tax implications from that. The easiest way that I've seen employers cover that is also they cover the tax liability that's above and beyond the standard, if it impacts the employee, and what they'll do is a gross up from that perspective. If there's any distributions from that perspective, but you absolutely need to have it reviewed by a tax partner. I actually like to recommend PwC or EY. Those are two that I've used in the past to really support this process. And we've actually, in some of the technology that I'm building now, we've actually built some algorithms to really support that and simplify that process using some of the experience that I've had in the past working with those two firms. But yeah, you definitely want to validate that. There's a couple things you also not just validate from a tax perspective, but you also want to make sure your plans. One of the biggest mistakes with RSUs is that employers assume their plans say X, and their plans don't have those protections in there, and how they're granting overall stock or stock options to employees. And so it's really important that you have a review of that plan on a consistent basis. And then when laws change, I highly recommend a review of your stock options or RSU plans on an annual basis.
So we talk about remote work a lot, and it's obviously impacted global payroll practices. Are there any other considerations organisations need to make? Is there anything else that you would say be aware of this?
Yeah, I think the one thing, and this goes to remote work, and I write articles on this quite often, and I talk about this quite often, is communications. I don't think that employees really understand the ramifications, what happens when an employee moves to a different country, especially with a nomad visa, for example, and not inform their employers. There's implications behind that. Depending on how that employer is set up, they may actually have an entity in that particular country. They may actually have sales or revenue in that particular country, and there could be implications regarding nexus or PE exposure from that perspective. And so it's communication. It's really important when you think about the complexity of global compliance and global payroll compliance. Is the employee, you just need to have a communication cadence and reminding employees on a consistent basis that we need to be aware of where you're at. That's not just from a global perspective; it also is from a state perspective. If you're in the U.S. as well, we need to know where you're at. In some cases, because some of our insurances may not cover you if you're in countries that you're not in. We may not be filing the right taxes. You may not be getting the benefits that you're entitled to in that particular country. And so it's really important that if we're going to do it right, we do it the way that we're supposed to do it. And we have to do the only way you can do that is if we're communicated where you're actually working from.
So we have a question here. What about remote working for a couple of weeks in a different country like Japan, not moving, no income from that country, no benefits in that country?
Yeah, great question. So every country has a limitation how long someone can be in a particular country. So I travel, I've been to 127 countries now, 4 passports later. I travel a lot for work, and sometimes I'm there for a couple weeks when I'm working. But I'm still a resident in the U.S., but I'm traveling and I'm doing some work in that particular country, sometimes for a couple of weeks. Each country, you just have to understand kind of what their limit is. Most countries are based on your citizenship and how you're actually in what you're doing in that particular country. So, for example, if I'm in Europe for 50 days, I'm good. But once I get over that 90-day threshold, that creates a bigger issue. So it's just really important to understand the rules and regulations behind that. Now, in Europe, there's also the A1 visa that was enacted a couple of years ago. And what that means is, depending on what you're actually doing in that particular country, you may have to get an A1 visa and report some type of income from that perspective. But it's really tied to individuals who are generating revenue. But there are implications behind that. So if you are in Europe or you have employees that are traveling, I definitely would advise you to look at that A1 visa status and expectation and requirement process and see if that if you could be impacted behind that, because there are employees who may travel for work. Typically, it comes to sales, but they're traveling for work that could possibly have to report income if the company is generating income in that particular country. But I would highly recommend just taking a look at that status from a European perspective.
So during COVID, one of the best stories that came out of it in a geeky way for me was that companies didn't know where their employees were, and during COVID it sort of slipped out, and even after COVID people were finding out where their employees were based. And one of the other issues that came out, which was going on before COVID but was more prevalent after COVID, was how do you track your employees? What would you suggest is the best solution to track how long people are going away for? You know, is it going back to the dreaded spreadsheets?
Ooh, I don't like spreadsheets at all.
I knew that I was going to have that result on when I said Excel spreadsheet.
I started to have PTSD a little bit when you said that. I think there are ways in HCM technologies that you can track that now with travel, especially with remote work, where employees may be in different time zones and you can track how long they're gone in those particular countries. I think it gets back to the honor system as well. If you hide something, that's probably not the employee you want, right? So you got to make sure that you're creating a system of trust. If someone wants to relocate and the employer is comfortable with that, like, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it to make sure we understand the implications behind it. Or if we can't do it, let's talk about the implications behind that as well. But it's really important that we understand that, because it's never when everything's fine and dandy and we're everything's working. It's when things come up. Most of the issues that we've heard from post COVID have been when someone was entitled to a benefit, or someone needs to take some time off, or someone someone had a baby. I mean, that was a big one. People had children, and then they realized that they did not have the registration or the time off that were allowed in that particular country. And so that communication is so important to be able to make sure that you can manage the complexity behind it. There's so many different avenues now out there that can give freedom and flexibility to employers. Like, again, the contractor solution, the global the employer of record solution, that can give flexibility that employers can leverage and hire employees in different countries without having to have entities. And also no bad visas. But employers need to understand what's going on before they can actually look into those type of solutions to make sure they're supporting employees and building that communication cadence as well.
What's the most effective? We've talked about communication a lot today. What's the most effective way that you've seen employers communicate with their employees?
Quite a few. So I say a good town hall, a coffee hour, and that could be every other month. I've seen email communications, or even using intranets within platforms that can give cadence. Like, hey, this is how we're going to communicate. Now, the thing is, you have to be consistent with that as well. You have to say this is what it is, and if there's a change, you have to outline that and be very clear with employees on that. I think employees right now, there's that relationship where it's, I don't want to get in trouble because I don't want to lose my job, but I also want to do what I need to do, and I want to have a work-life balance. So you have to, as an employer, build that cadence on how to make sure you're supporting the employee and communicating. That doesn't mean do everything, right? It doesn't mean you say yes to everything. But what it means is that you build a cadence of trust. And so when things like this happen, like, hey, I need to move, you can happen. I've had that happen multiple times. I had employees who want to move to different countries because either a spouse was moving, or they thought this would be a better work-life balance for them and their families. And we were really open to that. We were like, okay, great. Sometimes we paid for the relocation, sometimes we didn't. And the employee was responsible for that if this was their choice. But we were able to really walk them through that and say, look, tell us where you want. We're a remote organization, and so we've got to talk the talk and walk the walk. And if we do that, we've got to show that we have to give them the opportunity to have that.
So one of the topics that was a bit of a hot topic last year and potentially the year before was cybersecurity. So how do you address data security concerns, especially managing a global payroll?
Yeah, so this is the one that's a little bit more complex. And I know we just talked about this a couple of weeks ago. So
Mhm.
we had a very deep conversation on this a couple of weeks ago. Definitely can pull it up and watch that webinar as well. But it's the complexity that comes into where your data is being managed and where that user is at. So if someone doesn't tell you that they're working in Europe and their data is actually being housed in the US because that's where you think they're working, you're not fully compliant from that perspective because they're actually there. And so these are some of the things that employees have to think about. Like, that communication cadence is important because where you're someone sitting, where the data needs to be set, who can access that data. Think about having employees in China. Very strict firewalls there. How do you access that data? How do you have visibility of that data? How do you make sure you're compliant? It's really based on the rules and regulations that you have, and you need to validate that information quite often. One way, and actually, just I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and someone said this, and I thought it was a really good idea. You can track employees by IP addresses as well, and so where are they constantly logging in? So there's the honor system too, but you also can validate that information. Say, okay, we're noticing that you're checking in or you're logging into your computer constantly in this country that you're not supposed to be in. Have you relocated? So being proactive, not a you're in trouble conversation, but hey, we just want to validate this. We're noticing this IP address coming up in our compliance checks, our AT checks. Are you in this particular country, or is this you? Are you actually accessing this information? You can use some of those things to validate that and be proactive in those approaches to make sure that you're fully compliant from that perspective.
That's a really good proactive tip, isn't it? Really good. So we have another question. What are the issues of global payroll we can overcome with the help of AI?
Yeah, a great question. So as we kind of think through AI, it's learning, right? I think where what challenges are you having in a particular country? What are you seeing as trends? I think those are things that AI can really help you and take you to the next level and really understanding the overall experience that you want to put in place. So, for example, if you're onboarding employees in Nigeria and you're realizing in step 3 you're constantly having this problem, your AI tool can say, "Hey, this is where employees are stopping up," or "Hey, this is where they're not understanding the questions," or "Hey, this is a form that creates a lot of complexity." As an employer, you can leverage AI in a platform to say, "Hey, how do we fix this problem? How do we improve this problem to create a better experience?" Then you can also say you can take that information and like I'll give a little preview of what we're working on here. You can take AI and then you can take that information and pull so many different parts of what the overall experience is. how fast you're onboarding employees, how complex, what are some of the issues, what's the average time, what's the average time employees actually work, what type of salaries are you paying, what's the average acceptance rate for employees. AI can train you on so much of that. So when you're going in to create offer letters or you're going into to validate information, you go, hey, we're benchmarking here. We're noticing that we're actually having to bring people in at this level now. We want to validate that benchmarking data. We want to validate to make sure this is correct. You can use AI to really start asking questions that you're not asking just through analytics or reviews.
We ran a session in Dubai last year, and we had a presentation about ChatGPT, and AI, and how Diana actually produced reports that would take 4 hours that just literally took a minute or two and did it real time. So there are some really great benefits of AI helping you produce really, I would say, mundane roles or bits of your job and just making it, just super quick. I
Yeah.
don't think you should be frightened of it.
No, I think, but you have to be wary of it too. So, like when I think HR, and I think payroll. ChatGPT is a great tool, but it's also a challenging tool because it's pulling from the internet. It's pulling from a lot of information that you see on the internet. And again, as I said earlier, everything online is not true, right?
Yeah.
If that's the case, the sky is purple and, and we live on Mars. So those things are not true. So we have to truly validate that. The way that I like AI and the way that I've built AI within our technology is that we train the AI. We train it on the information that we know we've validated and we know that it's absolutely correct. So that when we're learning, we're saying, here's a segment of data that you're going to learn from because we've validated this information. And then how do we improve on that? But we're not going out to the internet to do that because it's just so much information, so much garbage out there. And you know the saying that garbage in, garbage out. So we want to make sure as we're building AI, I think, again, ChatGPT, not knocking them for what they do, but it's not something I would use for HR because HR needs to be, the kind of the source of truth. And so the AI has to come off the information that you've validated and you know is actually true.
I think Dennis agrees with you there. AI is only as good as its sources. Public AI is riddled with anomalies. Well, the world is flat, as you say, in some parts of Google.
Yeah, so and this is why I'll never use ChatGPT for that purpose. I think it's really important. There's a lot of opportunities for you to train. I highly recommend organizations who want to leverage AI build your own data source and leverage and make sure you're feeding that and let it train and learn from that. But you don't want to just have an open API for kind of ChatGPT type source because that's just too much on the internet. That's not necessarily correct or valid. And again, we get back to employee experiences. You don't want to create something through ChatGPT, send it to an employee, and they go, "This makes no sense. You don't know what you're talking about." Then you lose credibility with your employees from that perspective. And
Yeah.
the circle back, that gets you back to complexity because we want to be able to quickly get answers to employees. We want to quickly be able to resolve their problems, but we have to do it in a very methodical way. And that's one of the biggest challenges within global payroll.
So what does the future hold? There seems to be some really exciting changes. There's been some interesting changes since the last 5 years. Mainly I say due to COVID, and it's sped everything up. What do you see the future looking like?
Yeah, I'm very much focused on client experience. I'm very much focused on employee experience, and I think with that is automation and autonomy. It's really important, right? How do we get the right information in front of someone very quickly? How do we make sure it's the right information? And how do we give them? I don't need or I don't want clients to have to depend on me. I want clients to be able to go into a platform, learn themselves, have access to it, and know that they're leveraging a tool to make themselves better and to be able to come to the table and have those conversations with leaders based on the content that's within our platform. So we are very much focused on that. So when you think about automation, you think about AI, you think about learning, machine learning, and also personal learning. Those are things that I think is the future from that perspective. The world is going to be global. That's not going to change. You're seeing more and more companies, smaller companies, go global now. Historically, 10 years ago, going global was what the Googles of the world did, and that's what the IBMs of the world did, or the unicorns. Now you're seeing these startups that have less than 10 employees. They're going global. They're starting to hire their first employee. So the world is going to go that way. The world has been open. Those borders are breaking down. And you're also seeing countries, I think South Korea was the most recent one, who just announced their nomad visa. The countries are saying, yeah, that's the trend. We want people to come in. We want people to work here. We want people to live here. They understand that because that's going to impact their overall economy. They're starting to get on trend with that. Sometimes governments are a little behind. And so they're trending with that. So you're seeing governments trend with it. You're seeing employers trend with it. You're seeing employees want this because it really impacts their overall work-life balance and how they raise their families and how they support their families themselves. So the world is going global. The world's looking more autonomy. We live, and I've got my phone right here. This is the thing I live by. I mean, this is my relationship sometimes, and so you're on that all the time. So readily at your fingertips. People want better experiences. People want simplicity and flexibility, and that's where you're seeing the world go with technology. And that's what I'm focusing on when it comes to global payroll initiatives.
I think this is definitely a lot of relationships for a lot of people, especially when you go to a restaurant and you see people just on their phones rather than talking to each other. And we do have another question on AI. So, how easily can the AI system integrate with existing HR and accounting software?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So, how information goes into an accounting system. I don't think you can be a global payroll provider and not have GL integrations or accounting integrations. It doesn't really work anymore. It's simplicity. People like that. Getting back to simplified and flexibility. So you've got to leverage that. Now, how you push that data in, that's the part that you have to map, and that's what employers are looking for, more customability, because everyone changes or reports their financials a certain way. So that's where I think AI can help with that, and what's the best practice behind that. But it's really going to be based on what the employer is going to be looking for from that perspective, from that when they look at how they integrate into GL or HR systems.
Okay, another question. I think this is a really good question. What would you say to an employer that doesn't see the benefit of payroll without borders? Enabling employers through technology might not be enough to change the company's culture.
Yeah. So here's a analogy I would give with that. So I hope everyone knows this is a very American analogy, but I'm gonna use it anyway. Um, do you remember that company Blockbuster? And the company Netflix,
Yeah.
right? Blockbuster had the ability to buy Netflix years ago, and they said there's no way that people are going to really want to watch videos, DVDs at home, or rent DVDs from that perspective and watch them directly that way. And Netflix was like, "We're trending. We're going to be the new ones." And Blockbuster said no. So to answer your question, Leo, um, if you don't get on trend, you're going to become the next Blockbuster, right? Employees are leaving employers who are not focused on flexibility in work, remote work. Um, Studies have shown diversity in workforces are what creates successful companies. Data shows that in 2008, 2020, the companies that were global companies with global workforces, those are the ones that were very successful through these economic issues because they had flexibility between different economies, and so they were not focused on, or they didn't have all their eggs in one basket. You have to get on trend. You have to be able to think about that flexibility. The world is going this direction. You have to get on boat. If not, you will become the next blockbuster.
We have a tool called GPA comparison, and it lets you view all of the payroll providers. And the majority of our requests at the moment are for the long tail, for those of 3, 5, 10, 25 employees in different countries. So that is a way forward. It's not just, as you said, earlier on, it's not just the big global organizations. It's the startups, it's the companies that have been going around for 20 years, but maybe quite small, that are all of a sudden expanding because there's so much more opportunity now, not just in the country you're based in, but globally. And I think more and more companies are becoming aware of this now. So payroll needs to get on board.
Well, I think about it. I mean, like, let's really take a step and think about it. Do you find talent that's within your postal code?
No.
And that can be a couple hundred people. Or can
Yeah.
you find the best talent for the position that you're looking for out of 7 billion people? Like, think about that. How are you going to make sure you have the set up your business for success? Historically, it's always been easier just to find people that are close by your office, in your city, etc. But You want the best talent to allow you to compete in a global market. You find the best talent, you hire the best talent. Now, that's the step. The complexity is how do you manage that and do it compliantly? And that's where the payroll piece comes into it. But you want the flexibility to hire the best talent regardless. That talent could be in your postal code. That talent can be in Sri Lanka. You want to hire the best. And that's what that globalization works because you're able to hire the best talent, not just the talent that's in that postal code.
There you go. So we're coming to a natural end, I think. So if anybody's got any questions for Rick, quickly put them in the comment box now. But Rick, is there anything that you want to sort of leave us with today? Because I know there's a lot of things happening with you, isn't there, at the moment? Many exciting things.
Yeah, so I've got some really amazing news, guys. If you those who follow me on LinkedIn, I am launching a new business that's going to be launching this year. That's very much focused on the future of work and a lot of what we talked about today. We are going to over the next week be requesting some insiders from payroll and HR to come to our beta test group. So you'll see some postings and hopefully Melanie, you don't mind sharing as well. We will be getting people to come out and sign up for those beta tests. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you, all your pains, everything that you're going through, and making sure you can see what we're producing and what we're doing before we go live with our product, because we want to make sure that when we're creating a painkiller, we want to make sure we're solving that overall pain for you guys in this market. So how do we simplify and create flexibility with global payroll and employee experience within global workforce management systems? So there's more to come on that. We've got some really amazing things. The feedback that we're getting on this platform is that it's a game changer. It's going to simplify global payroll. It's going to simplify the overall employee experience in globalization. And it's going to feel very global. Global meaning global but local. So we definitely want to hear from you guys. If anybody is interested, please message me on LinkedIn. Even after this call, happy to connect with you there. But we will be putting some things out on LinkedIn over the next week with some QR codes, which you'll have to be able to sign up for. We will be vetting out any competitors. So unfortunately, competitors, we do not want to have you part of that, but we appreciate the feedback. But we definitely are looking for HR and payroll professionals because we're building the platform from you and we need to hear your voice and how we're actually building this out. So please sign up. It's going to be really fun and you get the insight of what's, what the future of work is going to be. So looking forward to hearing from you guys.
So a great opportunity. Leo, I expect you to get in touch with Rick. I'm joking, but I thought I would leave today on this nice positive comment. So if you do want to reach out to Rick anyway to ask questions, Rick you're always on hand, aren't you, Rick? I know you're a busy guy, but I know you do reply to people that do ask you questions on LinkedIn. So we're back in a few weeks' time on LinkedIn Live. So yeah, look out for our next LinkedIn Live. Contact Rick should you ask him any questions. Join the beta group. Let's go for it. Let's change the world of payroll. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you so much for your time, Rick.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.